As I mentioned earlier, I'm at the Abbey of Our Lady of New Clairvaux, a Trappist monastery. Now, for some of you who have read Eileen Pagel's recent book, Why Religion, you're familiar with her visit to a Trappist monastery in the snowy mountains of Colorado. Well, that was after her husband's sudden death, and she gained quite a bit of insight and quite a bit of comfort there. This California monastery is surrounded by, vineyards and olive trees. I come here once a year as a retreat to get away, to get renewed and refreshed. But for these 24 monks, this is not a retreat. This is their home. This is their workplace. They are part of the world. They're not separated. They're not separated from the world. They are in the world as much as you and I are in the world when we're in San Francisco. They work in the vineyards here and they make wine to support themselves, but mostly they pray. That's pretty much their job. They pray privately during the day, and then at each of their 5 daily worship services, they pray and they chant the Psalms. But we'll get back to them in a little bit. Right now, let's go back 2,000 years. Let's go back to Paul. A few years before he wrote the letter to the Romans, the Jews and the Jewish Christians had been run out of Rome. They were allowed to come back to Rome. They were allowed to return, but they were still persecuted. Some of them were thrown in jail. Some of them were even killed. Paul himself would be eventually arrested and executed for his faith. The question of how a Christian would live out his or her faith was indeed a life and death matter. So when Paul wrote, "Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God," this was not a theoretical statement. It was not an idea to be discussed. It wasn't just a matter of theology. To live out your faith in that era meant life or death. Well, to us, 6 months ago, such a statement, to live out your life, to live out your faith in your life, such a statement could have been made to us and we would have discussed it as, theology or an idea. What does it mean, theoretically, to put your faith on the line? Well, now things are entirely different. Each day we make life or death decisions. We make choices that affect our lives and our death. Do I go to the store? What store do I go to? When do I go to the store? For some, the question is, do I wear a mask? For others, we ask, do I dare be near somebody who isn't wearing a mask? And this church has had to make life or death decisions on whether to simply worship God together as we have done for decades. And we ask, do I dare reach out to someone in the church who is suffering, a friend? Do we visit someone who is struggling? Do I go to their home and pray with them? And we have swirling all around us people telling us what to do on TV, on the radio, the internet, friends, people we know, people we barely know, all telling us what we should be doing. Listen to all that noise that's just swirling around us. How do we know what to do? How do we know how to live out our faith? That's the question. And yet, here we have, right in front of us, the answer. There it is. Paul told the people of Rome, and now he is telling us during these dangerous times? The answer to that question. Do we bend to the world around us and look to the world around us for the answer? Paul answers, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God. And just what is that? What is the will of God? Well, he answers, the good, acceptable, and perfect. But Paul doesn't leave it at that. He doesn't leave that alone. He makes it specific. He makes it specific for each one of us, because each one of us has been given a gift. Each one of us has a unique way to live out our faith. The question for us today is, as it was in Paul's time, how do I live out my faith? Paul says, for some it is prophecy in proportion to faith. For some it is ministry in ministry. The teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. And we can add more ways for people to live out their faith. The positive person in cheerfulness. The person who is good with his or her hands in fixing things for people who can't fix them themselves. The gardener in planting beauty, growing food. The cook in feeding people. The healer in nursing people back to health. The world is broad and wide, and God has given us the space for each one of us to live out our faith. The question for each of us, each one of us, is how do I live out my faith? Which brings me back to this monastery, right here. Now, some might say that these men are retreating from the world. They're hiding from the real world. That's what they might say. Well, this part of the world is the real world, right here. For these monks, their gift is to pray, and so they pray. They are living out their faith right here. This is what they are called to do, and this is their gift to the world. So our unique question, the question that each of us must ask individually, and we must ask it each day, that question is, how do I live out my faith?